Hey everybody, let's talk about some jigs. Zeb, I know you're asking about jig fishing, man. This one's for you. I'm gonna make this simple for you. Jig fishing is probably my favorite way to fish in a tournament. If I can throw a jig, I'm gonna throw it. If I can get those 5 bites that I need, I'm gonna throw a jig because it produces big bass. And the reason I think that it produces big bass is because it presents a big profile. You know, if you're throwing a worm or something, it looks slender. It doesn't put out the presence that a jig does. When this skirt is in the water, it flares out and it looks bigger than it actually is. So it produces big bites. Now you may not get a lot of bites on it, but a jig is a really good way to catch a big bass. The skirt is probably the most important thing. Any jig that you fish, you want to make sure that your skirt really flares out well. One of the ways you can help it flare out well is make sure it's always pushed up to the top of the head as far as it can go. Make sure you have a good rubber band around it or wire, whichever it is, and trim your skirt up a little bit. Trim this top half of your skirt, trim it down a little bit. What that'll make it do is flare out a little bit more. That's what makes bass react to a jig, is when it stops and it flares out. It's like when a bluegill stops and it turns around and it's flaring its dorsal fin and its pectoral fins, or when a crawfish stops and its pinchers open up and they're in that defensive posture. That's what makes a big bass strike. So that's the casting jig right there. This is, you know, this is really one of the first jigs designs that was made. It's a little arc right there, and then it's kind of flat on the top. It's really good for going through cover. Another jig that I use probably, well, I always have one tied on, I'll put it that way, is a finesse jig. It's different, has a ball head, and the skirt is thinner. It's more finesse, so it's sprayed out here at the top. It's thinner in the body. I have a trailer on this one. This is a baby Hyper Freak. Usually the hook is a little bit thinner gauge, so you can set the hook better using lighter line. But these jigs are awesome pretty much everywhere except really heavy cover. It's hard to get them through heavy cover with that ball design. But this gets a lot of the bites that a shaky head will, but sometimes bigger because of that skirt on there. So I really like throwing this jig. And lastly is the football jig. As the name implies, you know, football head design, what that does is when it's on the bottom, it allows the bait to remain level on the bottom. And it's really good when you have a trailer on there, because if you're using a crawfish trailer, for example, it sits upright and allows those pinchers to go upright. It's a really good presentation. But really, you just drag this thing on the bottom real slow. Really good for deep structure fishing, offshore, you know, times that you're fishing past 20 feet. Really good throwing the football jig. So those are the 3 types of jigs. Now I'll show you my 3 types of trailers. Alright, a trailer is really important. It really finishes off the jig. And my 3 main trailers that I throw is this one right here. This is an LFT flipper, and I probably throw it 70% of the time because I can really imitate anything I want to. Crawfish, bluegill, shad. It really allows me to do pretty much anything with the jig. The thing that I really like about it are the rudders. It actually has rudders built in, so when you're moving the bait, the rudders are closed, or the flaps here are closed, and when you stop the bait, they open up. And when they open up, that's like it's adding to that flare of the skirt. The whole concept of defensive posture, flaring out, it really adds to it. So I really like this trailer a lot. The next one is the Hyper Freak. It's a big flapper basically, and it's really good for dirty water conditions. or anytime you're really trying to get a aggressive bass to strike, this is a really good one right here. A lot of thump to it. And then lastly is the Zoom Speed Craw, an excellent little crawfish imitation. It's short and compact. It still has a lot of vibration that it puts out, so it's a really good jig trailer on finesse jigs especially. Alright, so we talked about the main types of jigs, my favorite trailers. Now, when should you fish a jig? Me personally, I have a jig tied on every time I go out fishing. But to break down some scenarios for you guys, docks are an excellent example. Probably the best would be isolated cover, like a patch of trees that are on a point, or something isolated, like you know, a brush pile, you know, even like a patch of grass, something like that. You know, basically places you would fish a Texas rig. A lot of times I'll fish a jig in places you'd fish a spinnerbait, like when you're bumping it off cover and things like that. But trees and docks and points where you throw a Carolina rig, that's where you throw that football jig. You know, gravel, ledges are really good. Guys, there's so many situations you can throw a jig in, but really I would say the number one way to think about it is anywhere you would throw a Texas rig bait, like a big 10-inch worm, or you know, maybe a creature bait or something like that. You can throw a jig in. It's the same type of presentation that you're using. You know, you want to just bump the bait off the cover, fish it a little bit slower, I would say, than you would a Texas rig. Really allow that skirt to work for you. But it's a super versatile bait, and it gets big bites. So try them out. Don't be afraid. You know, spend a couple of days, even if you don't get a bite. I promise you, when you get a good jig bite, there's nothing like it. Bass hit a jig harder than anything out there, and it's really exciting. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. There's so many questions you could ask. I can't cover everything in the amount of time I did this video in, but if you have any questions, comments, leave them in the section below, and I'll get back with you. Maybe I'll make another video on it. So let me know, guys. Talk to you later.